Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul, Season 3, Episode 5. They're calling this one Chicanery. And we get a lot of chicanery in this episode. Starting off with the cold open, which is a flashback to a time that we haven't seen yet. So we know we've flashed back in the past to Chuck and Rebecca together. We flashed back to sort of before that when Jimmy and Chuck were, younger and dealing with the death of their mom and dad, and even when they were like in their childhood. But here we are in a period that is almost completely a mystery in the lore of Better Call Saul, because this is taking place in the past, but after Chuck and Rebecca have separated, and we still don't know why. We find out in this episode that it's amicable, right? That they weren't really having a screaming fit, or that she was just like smothered or hating him. Like they decided together, that they should do this split. But it's clear here that Chuck still wants Rebecca to see him as a good and normal person, and probably that he still cares about her to some degree. The opening is him having his lawn mowed. They're sort of putting in light fixtures that aren't hooked up into his house. I was confused at first. I thought that this was originally, when we were coming into this cold open, I thought it was a fake out. I thought, okay, they're showing us like the house with no electricity, but it's really just because they've just gotten the house or something like that. And as we go further in the episode, you realize, okay, no, he's had the house for a while. They're installing these light fixtures, and the reason he's setting things up to look as if he has electricity, including finding a phone. First line of the episode, by the way, that was not my catch. Somebody on Reddit pointed that out, and boy, was that a great tie-in to the end of the episode. But all of that stuff is building up to him having Rebecca over for dinner and having this incredibly complex lie that he tells. He's got this whole thing about, the power company accidentally shut off my power. I was already started with the fish. And the interesting thing here is that Rebecca's suggestion is probably the much easier one. They could just go out to dinner. Like, it would literally not be a thing for them to just have dinner out. But I think Chuck is trying to hang on to some sense of normalcy, and also trying to recapture his, what it was like when she was in their home as much as he can. So he's trying to recreate that experience, and he tells this huge lie. I love the detail of the fact that the lie includes this transposed address that the trick that Jimmy used to screw Chuck over in the last season. We find out in this flashback, it might have been a seed planted by Chuck. I mean, listen, Jimmy's responsible for whatever his own actions were, but it is interesting to see that idea kind of popping up and possibly being planted in Jimmy's subconscious. And it's really great to go back and see a time when these guys don't hate each other, or at least when Jimmy doesn't hate Chuck. You get, by the end of this episode, you understand that Chuck's problems with Jimmy are pretty deep-rooted, but he's also really good at hiding them. And here he's hiding a lot of stuff from a lot of people. He's trying to look normal for Rebecca, and things are going great. I mean, it's a nice, he has candles all over the place. It looks great. The cinematography, obviously, with all of these Chuck with no electricity scenes are amazing. I love the way they set things up with sunlight, and in this one in particular, it's candlelight. And in the the Better Call Saul Insider podcast, they've been talking a lot about this new camera they've got that really just absorbs a ton of extra light. The ISO goes crazy high numbers, and that they've been able to get a lot of interesting new shots. I'm guessing they were able to do some stuff with that here, because a lot of stuff with candlelight. Maybe there was other lighting, I don't know, but it's really beautifully lit in this. And then everything's going great. And again, everything's going so great that I almost believe the lie. I was at this point not 100% sure that Chuck was lying. I thought, okay, maybe this is the new home, or they're getting reset up or something. it's not doesn't make 100% of sense now that I think back on it, but I'm dumb, so cut me some slack. But then comes the serpent into the garden. Rebecca gets a cell phone call, and Chuck cannot handle it. And it's interesting because Chuck has, we know that he's got a mental problem, and they'll explore that. We explore that in this episode a lot. The interesting thing here is that it's not just the electricity. Like for Chuck, yes, seeing the electricity does trigger him, but I think it's extra difficult for him to deal with because of the other emotional stress that he's under, because it's Rebecca, because he's trying to put up this front and maybe salvage some of his old life. I don't know exactly what his angle is here. I don't know if he thinks he's going to get back together with her, but it's certainly possible. And at the very least, he's trying to keep a facade of normalcy for her. And all this stuff, I mean, he really cares. He cares enough to lie to her. And here he is in this already very emotionally vulnerable situation, and then his external stressor happens, which is, again, technically a mental issue to be sure, but still like piling on top of all the other stuff he's already under and possibly related. As we find out and have found out in the past, he didn't get the electricity problem until after Rebecca left. So Chuck has a lot of stuff pushed way down on his soul that he's trying not to deal with, but yeah, it's coming out in different places, Chuck. You got to worry. We follow up with Jimmy at the vet with his little goldfish, which I thought was just a great scene where he's there, the one guy on the left with the iguana and the lady on the right with the cat, and he's got like his bagged goldfish. And you think, okay, well, this is dumb. You know, like, okay, why would you take your goldfish to the vet? And he gets in the room with the vet, and the vet from before, you know, the one who's been dealing with Mike has, and we find out Mike has given Jimmy the number and contact info for this guy, is like flipping out. He's like, there's not enough oxygen in that bag. You need to get him a bigger tank. You need to make sure I have to feed him. Get a bubbler. What are you thinking, man? I just, that maybe the funniest thing in this episode, you know, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, dark comedies, and this one in particular didn't have a lot of funny moments, but that little moment of well-needed levity from this vet. And after he dresses Jimmy down for mistreating his goldfish, Jimmy says, hey, listen, I'm here for your other services, actually, and I need somebody with light fingers. Which the vet responds to, does he need to fit into tight spaces? No. And if you are a fan of Breaking Bad, at that point you knew we were getting some Huel action. Gonna get some Huel action. Yes, Huel is back. We don't see him until later, but they're tipping their hand right here at the edge. If you know what's happening, you know where he's coming. The next scene after that is Kim talking to Mesa Verde. And this, I think, is a piece of setup slash not misdirection, but she's getting ready for the fallout of what's going to happen after this episode. And I don't know for sure everything that's going to fall. Her and Jimmy have a plan, I think, that goes beyond even what we've seen already. The episode ends where it ends, but there's definitely going to be even more sort of avalanche from these few stones they've kicked up. But she's letting Mesa Verde know ahead of time, listen, there's going to be some stuff with this guy. She tells him that Chuck is accusing Jimmy. Interestingly enough, she mentions the transposition. The way she tells them does not include the breaking and entering. It doesn't include the actual facts of the case that Chuck is bringing against Jimmy. It's more about what Chuck is actually mad about. The whole chicanery of switching the numbers around and stuff, which Chuck can't, like, he has the evidence, he has the tape saying that Jimmy did that, but that's not part of his offense against Jimmy. So the fact that she brings this up makes me think that she's concerned that all of the facts of this case are kind of going to come to light. It's going to make her look bad, and she's trying to get ahead of it. I don't think there's a play here for her. It's just her sort of letting them know as a professional courtesy, hey, glad you're happy with me as a lawyer, and they are very much happy with her as a lawyer. But you're like, there might be some stuff happening, so just a heads up. And they're cool with it. I was really glad. it's nice to see Kim succeed because she tries so hard and she puts up with so much crap from Jimmy. I mean, I like the guy, but just give Kim her own show. Spin that off. It's like after Breaking Bad, and now she's just doing Law somewhere. I could see that. Anyway, we get the prep for the hearing. Chuck is there in the courtroom. They're talking about, turning off the light for him. That they're going to move the court reporter further away so he doesn't have to deal with that electricity. And all of that's just sort of dressing, because the real purpose of the scene is that Howard is having misgivings about this trial. Howard from HHM, sort of the main partner that we see other than Chuck, he's concerned that Chuck's condition and Chuck's vendetta is bad for business. I mean, Jimmy's already put a tarnish on them a little bit with the Mesa Verde thing, and I think Howard is getting to the point where he doesn't want to deal with this crap anymore. You got to feel bad for Howard, because he's put up with a lot from Chuck. And I don't think he's on either one of these brothers' side. Like, he's more on Chuck's side just because Chuck has more power in his world. But even so, he's getting sick of what Chuck is doing. And he's kind of trying to rein him in. He doesn't have the power to say, no, you can't do this. But you see where his intentions are here. He says, listen, this is not going to be good for our law firm for you to drag your brother through this mud. It's going to look bad. There's going to be details of your condition come out that's going to make us look bad. And Chuck doesn't listen even a little bit. He's so hell-bent on this vendetta against Jimmy that he is literally willing to tarnish the name of the firm he built in order to drag his brother's name through the mud. He will get in the mud as long as Jimmy's covered in mud and not able to be a lawyer anymore. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff lately that you can really despise Chuck. Like, I think in the first several seasons, Chuck was more of a ambiguous character, and you're really starting to see him become very driven by this idea of taking Jimmy down, and he's much more of a villain than he ever was. I know that people hated Chuck before now, but his obsession here is what's driving him over the edge, and I think that is what is going to kill him ultimately. Maybe not kill him, but definitely take him down. His obsession is what's going to hurt him the worst. We get to the trial. You get opening statements, sort of basic, like, here's what we want to prove, here's what they want to prove. And there's a lot of stuff that follows this that's sort of a recap of all of the offenses and all of the incidents between Jimmy and Chuck going back through Better Call Saul. There's this whole, Kim brings up a lot of stuff about, the stuff that Chuck had done to Jimmy. Later on, Chuck mentions under testimony things that Jimmy had done to him. And there's the great moment where because the first witness is Howard, and she calls him to the stand and, talks about how Jimmy had worked his way up from the mailroom to be a lawyer without telling anybody. And they're like, why did you think about making him associate? No. Why not? Well, we thought it looked like nepotism. And who's the other H in the Howard? Hamlin McGill? That's my dad. You just little dig, obviously that's not even that might be a nail in the coffin, but it's a pretty small nail. But it's just those little things oh yeah, Chuck has been screwing over Jimmy this entire time. And Jimmy a little bit Chuck too. And they play the tape. It's, it's interesting to see because none of the other people in this room have heard this tape. None of these people have felt the true extent of Jimmy and Chuck's sort of relationship at its most raw, except for maybe Howard, because Howard saw Jimmy come in screaming at Chuck. But here we have, these two guys playing it up off of each other. And Chuck, by the way, acting, pushing himself to the limit to sort of look more crazy, as he says, and not just more crazy, but more vulnerable for Jimmy, needing him to confess to this. And so seeming not just physically vulnerable, but also emotionally broken. And Jimmy falls into his trap. Obviously, we know from last season, but it's fascinating to hear that. That everybody, not to hear that, but to see everybody hear that, and know that that is now in the light of day, not as a piece of evidence for what Jimmy had done with the transposition of the numbers, but as, I mean, that too, obviously, but also as Chuck, like evidence of how badly Chuck and Jimmy's relationship has soured and what lengths Chuck is willing to go to. Speaking of the lengths Chuck is willing to go to, there's the scene right before he gets picked up to go to court where he's rehearsing his lines. And man, if you need a villain, I'm just saying, the Chuck has devolved into something that I don't think he was to start with, or at least he's stripped off a lot of these layers. Maybe it's been a performance this whole time, and we're finally getting down to the real Chuck. But he's there, like trying to think of what the most empathetic line is for him to say to put his brother away from lawyering for good, and it just comes off so slimy and so and stuff later too. Where he compares himself to like AIDS victims and things. I'm on board with the haters now. I was not on board with the haters in the past, but I really am. Even with Chuck's problems, I think that his bitterness that he's held on to has really twisted him into something terribly ugly. Whether or not he has a real point about Jimmy has become less material to me, because he's let his real grievances turn him into something that he should not be. Chuck gets to the courtroom. Huel bumps into him. And they're, I like that they sort of show you enough of their cards for you to put some stuff together. Like you can figure out, okay, Huel either took something or dropped something or something there. Like we see him, like we see his face. They're not trying to hide the fact that there was some kind of swap. They plant that seed, and they plant it early enough so that you can kind of forget about it, or, you wonder about it at the time and you're not sure if he took or planted or what, but you get a lot more testimony with Chuck. The storytelling here is just impeccable. Jimmy all this time has been waiting for something. He's been looking back at his secretary. She's like, somebody's late at the airport. We don't, up until now, we don't know what the thing he's waiting for is, but Chuck gets on the stand, starts to give his testimony, and Rebecca shows up. And you start to see Jimmy's plan come together. And I do like that, Chuck calls Jimmy on what he's doing here. Chuck figures it out to a point. He understands that Rebecca's there to unnerve him. He understands that Jimmy is playing an emotional game here, but he doesn't expect the full extent of it. Like, he calls Jimmy out. He's like, oh, what? You're going to do some Perry Mason crap with, bringing my wife in and trying to get me to crack? What is this? This is ridiculous. And yet Jimmy, by the end of it, does in fact pull some Perry Mason crap, possibly to the point where I'm not 100% sure. Well, this isn't a court of law. It's a court of lawyers, but it's not like a courtroom. It seems like some of the trickery Jimmy pulls here would probably be beyond the pale of what would actually be allowed from a legal professional in any case. But he has the cell phone trick, right? He backs Chuck into a corner talking about his condition, and Chuck doubles and triples down on the fact that this is a physical condition. There's no mental problem here. It's all physical. It's real. Doctors haven't figured it out yet, but as the aforementioned, doctors rejected AIDS back in the day thing, and he gets put in that corner. He has to. And Jimmy, I love the way this is set up, because Jimmy, with his, Chuck senses that Jimmy's setting him up for something, and he says, what, you're going to say you have a phone in your pocket? Jimmy pops it out, and Chuck, I love the moment where he says, but there's no battery in it. Because, well, it's sort of his delusion speaking, right? He assumes, I think, to a certain extent that it must be, because he believes that he believes this. It is a mental problem, but he really believes it's a physical problem. But also, he can justify the idea that there's no battery in the cell phone because he knows, or he thinks at this point, that Jimmy would not want to hurt him. He knows Jimmy's character. He knows Jimmy is, even if he doubts the condition, that he has sympathy for Chuck and will defer to his, his issues, and which makes the hit of the battery in his pocket so much harder because Jimmy has essentially stopped caring about this. Not about anything, but about, his brother's feelings. He's willing to play dirty now. He's willing to bring, not only bring Rebecca into it, but sort of look like the bad guy in front of her. I think Jimmy respects Rebecca a lot and cares about her to a certain degree. And for him to drop this bomb on Chuck in front of Rebecca, with her knowing that she's a pawn in his game at this point, it says a lot for how scorched earth Jimmy is willing to go and how far he has gone to get to this point in his character, because he's cutting all ties. Chuck is dead to him. Rebecca's dead to him. Maybe not dead to, but you know what I'm saying? Like, he has burned his ships with this. There's no going back. There's no recourse from this. He will win this fight. He will be a lawyer when all of this is done, but he will not be a brother anymore. Not with good standing. Him and Chuck, I can't imagine ever having a civil conversation after this moment. And the impact, the ending of this scene, everybody kind of freaks out because Chuck has his just meltdown and really shows his true colors and shows how much he despises Jimmy, which is what the defense contended the whole time, that this is just a personal vendetta. Kim had set that up at the beginning, and we really see Chuck bring the hammer down again with all of the past stuff that we've seen for them of his problems with Jimmy and again, yeah, he's kind of right. Jimmy's not a great, as far as like obeying the law, Jimmy not a good lawyer, but he's exposed for his true self, for his angry, obsessed, ranting self, and exposed for being mentally ill, because we understand now that there's no possibility that the physical side of his condition could be expressed. But if he's allergic to electricity, the battery should have hurt him. Although, as just a quick aside, if I was Chuck, I'd be like, well, yeah, there's a battery there, but there wasn't actually any current flowing through the battery, so that's why I was okay. It's only when there's current running. See how you can do it? But regardless, Chuck is not that rational, I don't think. And whether or not he can pull back and actually convince these people that there's still some kind of physical condition. And I did love the moment where his lawyer was even like, listen, it doesn't matter that he's mentally ill, throwing Chuck's sort of own, like the one thing Chuck wants to hold on to, back in his face. Regardless of how he justifies this, he's probably toast here with this particular hearing. I don't know what the fallout here is. I loved the moment when he looked at the exit sign and you got that big close up, as Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul loves to do with these, when Chuck is, in a room with some electricity and that buzz of the electric light in the exit sign that we'd established. They established it several times. Can't turn the exit signs off. Bummer that you can't turn the exit signs off. And then to have that close up and to have Chuck's condition so well visually represented, right? This physical, like the word exit in red, full foreground, out of focus, with him so small behind and underneath of it as it just buzzes and buzzes in his soul. What, I don't know, what a masterstroke. It's so beautifully done. And the best part is that we're only halfway through this season. This is only episode 5. We've got 5 more episodes to go. There was no Mike stuff in this episode, which is fine. It's not like I need a giant dose of Mike every episode. It worked really well. But I think that this is a really great dividing line. We're getting a lot of a good, like again, sort of wrapping up past stuff between Chuck and Jimmy, and I think moving into a new dynamic. I don't know what that new dynamic is, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. This show continues to be just so quietly amazing, so understated, so easy looking. The fact that they make this look so easy is what is the most amazing part about it. The plotting and the intertwined threads and the acting and the cinematography and every single piece of this show works so well with every other piece that you just can't help but be impressed and amazed that they make it work so well. And as always, I continue to be excited for what's coming next. We are only halfway through this season. It's more stuff to come. I don't know, Chuck and Rebecca, maybe they get back together. That would be interesting. Chuck and Jimmy, where are they going? What happens with Mike? Is there going to be more stuff with, like, Jimmy's getting a little bit more into the underworld now? Are we going that direction? I don't know. I don't know. But I'm pumped up. And I hope you guys are too. If you have any thoughts or things that I missed maybe in this recap, I'd love for you to drop them in the comments. Love it when you guys comment on the episodes, and I try to respond as often as I can. And I will see you guys next week with another episode of the Better Call Saul recap. Take care, guys.